which is I'd love to hear Eric talk about his thought process when he sits down to come up with new riffs for Hate Eternal, from the initial inception to the arrangement of full songs, kind of how he developed his unique uh, polyphonic way of writing for two guitars. I've noticed that too. The one thing that I find interesting about Hate Eternal is the two guitars doing totally different things on both sides, yet working together real well.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of that, and you can appreciate this, is like a lot of the counterpoint. I feel like it single-handedly comes from my upbringing in classical music. It's like, the different things, not just harmonizing, but doing different things. For me, there's not a much of a, with Hate Eternal, and really my whole career, there's not a lot of thought process. It's about what comes naturally. And sometimes I'm fortunate where a melody just comes in my head. I can't even tell you how many times. And I've noticed it and this is related to our previous conversation, the more and more clear my head has become through what I'm doing with the meditating, I've noticed that I hear more and more melodies in my head that have translated to riffs. And I find that fascinating because there has to be a correlation there. A perfect example, Bloodline was the first single we released for Cannibal Corpse. The first riff on that song, it was floating in my head. I was just sitting there. I was drinking coffee. It was in the morning and I hadn't stretched yet. And I just heard, I was like floating around. I was like, wow, that's fucked up. And then, I go into my home studio and figure out the tempo with the click. And then I, do the click in Pro Tools and then track to it. And the one thing for me, I would say 90-something% of every song I've ever written usually starts with the beginning riff. Like I'll know, like that riff I just was humming. Like I knew that was the first riff of a song. I was like, man, that's the intro riff right there. And a lot of times I will play it over and over again and just play to it. And I'll just feel it, kind of like my practice routine. There's no preconceived notion or thought. I just let it flow. And not every song I've written has been written from beginning to end, especially if you're collaborating with other players and stuff. Like, hey, I got this riff. Maybe that works. It doesn't always work out that way. But a lot of the stuff that I've written has been written from beginning to end, compositionally wise almost. And so it just kind of flowed naturally that way. Now, when I'm writing for Cannibal or when I was writing for Morbid, it was a little different because there's not a ton of thought process, but that's where the kind of producing comes in the sense of like, okay, like example, the last two Cannibal records, some of the stuff had been written already by Alex or Rob, and I would look at the album as a whole and be like, what kind of dynamics would I like to add in here? Like. Maybe, man, we need something real sludgy or something.
Like what's missing?
Like I'll approach it from a almost like a producer aspect, I guess. And that doesn't necessarily mean like there's some songs I thought would end up being a certain way and they ended up just taking their own path. Like there's one song I wrote on the new record that I remember I wrote it and I thought it was going to be a certain way. And I remember I sent it to Paul and I was like, yeah, man, I got this like slow song with just a couple fast parts, and he started working on it. And he was like, hey, man, I don't want to correct you here, but it's more like a fast song with a few slow parts. And I was like, that's fucking funny. That's funny shit. And now that when I went back to when I started tracking that song, and then I realized, holy shit, Paul's fucking right. It's a fast song with a few slow parts because it was hard as fuck to track. So I was like, oh shit, okay, he was right. So it doesn't always go the way you plan, but usually for me, it's the same approach as getting a guitar tone. Just let it flow naturally. I don't put a lot of thought into it, especially with Hate Eternal, where I don't. That being my own baby, I have no limitations. I will just write whatever comes to me naturally. And And so because it's my own baby, I just never put any limitations on Hate Eternal of how I'd approach it. And so I guess I feel fortunate that I've been able to just have that natural progression of feel to be able to create songs. And some of those riffs came, maybe I'm in my head, some came from me doodling around, tinkering around. Almost all my riffs either come from the head or just me totally fucking
And
off
then just like
like,
finding
wow.
something cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, man. Now, back in the day, back in like the early days of like Ripping Course, me and Sean had a boom box. And this is before I even had a 4-track. This is going back in the late 80s, early 90s. And we would just record me and him just jamming. And we'd listen to it the next day and be like, oh shit, that's pretty cool riff there, man. What the fuck is that? And that's how I approach solos sometimes, is like me just doodling around, and I'll track something. I'll be like, oh, that's pretty cool. And then
I mean,
refigure it out.
that's a totally valid way of writing. I do that a lot. And I remember reading that George Harrison, like, I was reading him talking about working with Paul and John and
Mm-hmm.
how they would like have these magical inspirations, like write a song in a dream that becomes one of the most famous songs of all time, wake up, write it down kind of thing. But George Harrison didn't always have that. Like he would have to sit there and just like fuck around till something cool came up and then like just build it brick by brick. And he also ended up with some of the great ones. So
Right.
it's totally
It's
valid.
interesting how it comes. For me personally, it comes from within. It's like and I've said this on a deeper level. It's like, for me, my music has always been an extension of the depth of who I am, and kind of the, how would I say it? Like the depth of everything that I've experienced in my life led me to playing music, to have that expression, because I had no other way to express myself in any positive fashion. Before I played guitar, I was expressing myself in all the wrong directions. And then I started playing guitar and I put all that emotion into my playing. And some guys are not that way, but I'm a very, I don't know if that's the proper word, but like, I'm an emotional player. My playing, my, whether I'm an emotional guy, you can just tell, you talk to me or I'm on stage, I put all of who I am into everything I do. I don't half-ass anything. I never have. I mean, I cook dinner. I'm cooking it 110%, man. If I do anything, even all the jobs I've had in my life and the jobs that I did not like, I still gave it 110%. But the one thing, I've always let it come from within. Everything I write, just let it come from within naturally. Let it happen smoothly. If you start putting too much mental thought or energy into thinking about it, I feel like it just limits your creativity and spontaneity,
Yeah, totally. I agree. I think the thing that's important to think about is thinking about doing what you got to do to sit down and work, like
Mm-hmm.
arranging your life in a way to allow yourself to do the work. And I think like thinking about doing the things that, like you were saying, like the yoga routine, like the stretching, like
Mm-hmm.
all that kind of stuff, like doing those things allow the other things to just present themselves, in my opinion. Sorry, go
It
ahead.
happened. All those things. You're right. All the other stuff that you do in life, I feel like it affects everything, affects everything. For myself, I'll speak for myself. I've learned that. And you know what? The more comfortable you are within your own skin, and the more, and it's funny, somebody might say, man, I've created decades of uncomfortable music. And that's because I'm expressing that comfortability within myself. And that's something that will never go away from me. Like, there's things that I've experienced in life that I know will be there forever. I deal with things, and music has been that way of expressing it for myself. But as I've been able to become more maybe confident as a person, or healthier as a human, mentally speaking, it allows that kind of blank canvas to be able to create and on the fly, and not, like I said, in recent years I've been hearing more and more melodies in my head, which is really been unique for me, and it's been happening for quite some time, where it just a melody comes in my head, and then there it is, or I'm, so I usually know it's just a switch,
Yeah,
like,
you
man,
just
that's a killer riff, and but if you start, I never just sit down and say, man, I'm going to write a riff today.
mhm.
Like it's, I do the same. I sit down and play guitar every day. I
Yep.
sit down and stretch every day. And within that time frame that I'm doing it, maybe I write a couple riffs. Maybe I write a whole freaking song. Who knows? But the most important thing to me for someone trying to write is never add the pressure. And I've been in pressure situations like Domination, for instance. I wrote 5 songs of music. I wrote those 5 songs of music in 2.5 months.
That is fast, man.
Yeah. Because I was touring for all of Covenant. Then we finished Covenant and decided, okay, I was going to become a member. And then I had a couple months to write some songs. Unfortunately for me, I was able to write, a substantial amount of music. But you know what? Same with Violence Unimagined. I wrote 3 songs of music. I wrote it in about 2.5 months, on top of learning all the other songs and then doing pre-pro with the guys because I was producing it. And so, if I sat there and like, holy shit, I got to write songs, like I probably wouldn't have wrote anything. I just said, you know what? This is what I do, man. I play guitar. If somebody says, what do you do best? I would like to think, or what do I enjoy the most? Like you said, I love writing songs. I love playing guitar. Just let it flow. Don't overthink it. Let it happen naturally. And then knock on wood, for me, it's been ongoing.
It just keeps happening.